So now we can go ahead and start. So the first question is, what climate planning and design projects do you currently have underway or in design that affect the estuary? We'll start with Boston.
Great, so yeah, Delanney and I are going to answer sort of jointly, but we just want to give a quick sort of recap of where we are with our climate resilience planning for the city of Boston generally. So we have completed all of our neighborhood coastal resilience plans for all 47 miles of the shoreline. Of course, the Climate Ready Dorchester plan is really the most important for this conversation. And so that kind of covers the range of planning. We sort of put out our roadmap of what are the projects that we want to do. They're kind of conceptual level. And so now where we are is moving from those conceptual level ideas of how we can address coastal flood risks to implementation of those projects, which includes like design and permitting and ultimately construction of those projects. And so we're at a project by project level perspective across the city and of course in this area specifically. Delanney, do you want to talk about one or two specific projects that are relevant?
Yeah, so last year in coordination with the Environment Department and DCR, we actually worked on a project at Tinian Beach, which recently, a couple of weeks ago, we submitted an application to a FEMA BRIC program. BRIC is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, to advance the Tinian Beach project from 30% schematic design, so initial design that we did last year, to final design, permitting, and construction. The project that we submitted, well, DCR submitted the application. It is for just over $15 million to do all of that work. And DCR will be taking the lead from now on that project, which is really awesome. We also, BPDA, City of Boston, working with DCR again, we submitted a statement of interest for Neponset Circle to the state's Municipal Vulnerability Program. So we'll be developing an application for that over the next couple of months. So more work to come. The City of Boston's Green Infrastructure Department recently just staffed up. So our colleague Kate England, we're not necessarily familiar with the projects for stormwater flooding that her office will be working on, but as mentioned, she just staffed up. So I think down the line, she'll be a great person to bring into these conversations to really explore some of the other things that are happening more inland along the estuary here. And then Hannah, I'll pass back to you for Army Corps updates.
I'll make it quick. I want to keep it short. One more thing just to mention is that the City of Boston has an active partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to complete a coastal storm risk management feasibility study. And so that study is really focused on medium and longer term coastal flood risks. So things we might be more worried about on like the 2070 time horizon, but that we still need to think about start thinking about now, given how long it takes to do things. So that partnership, happy to provide more information or talk more specifically about that, but that will be another really good way to engage in a process for medium and long-term plans while the city in parallel is working on kind of nearer term focus areas.
Sarah?
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. This is the first time I think that DCR has been able to attend one of these sessions, and it's a treat for me because I was just telling Delanney as we were talking before that I spend most of my time in the shoreline area, in this area, and it's not necessarily because I don't love it, because I do, but also because we do see some of our greatest vulnerability here. And as the director of climate resilience, it's sort of a focus area of ours is to figure out how we work collaboratively with the communities and folks like you who represent other groups as we plan for what's to come in terms of sea level rise, storm surge issues from storms, and then precipitation events. So I just want to share with you a couple of things that we're working on in addition to what was mentioned in our collaboration on a couple of specific projects in Boston. But DCR is working on an internal vulnerability assessment, looking at all 465,000 acres that we own statewide, from the coast out to the Berkshires, to understand how our properties are going to be impacted by the various threats related to climate change. And so we're in the process of doing that now. It's a massive undertaking, as you can imagine, because we have such a variety of different types of landscapes, uses, geography. And so we're working through that now. And one component of that, which I wanted to share today to make sure you were aware of it, is our parkways vulnerability assessment. So as a sort of subset of how we look at our infrastructure, one really unique asset that we manage at DCR is our parkway system. And many of our parkways are adjacent to beautiful water resources like the Atlantic Ocean, Quincy Shore Drive, for example, but also along some of the inner sort of riverine areas. And so a lot of our parkways are actually really subject to flooding. So we're taking a deep dive right now. We're in the process of doing an economic analysis to look at how the parkways enhance the local economies in different ways, but also if they're not, useful, for example, if they're flooded or under like a damage scenario, what would be the negative consequences from an economics perspective? And that's kind of what we're looking at now. So results for that are going to be a ways away, probably another 6 or 8 months, but that will be something that we'll look to, bring back to this group and share some of our findings. And hopefully some of the data and results would actually be useful for your communities to incorporate in your planning as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the Commonwealth strategy called Resilient Mass Coasts. So in November, the Healy administration announced the statewide effort for Resilient Mass Coast Initiative, which is going to be led by our Coastal Zone Management Office. But since DCR does own and steward a lot of public lands along the coastline, we're on that kind of core team with CZM, and we're going to be working with them as they kind of navigate through that. I just have some notes here, but it's really to focus on regulatory policy and funding mechanisms to address long-term solutions along the coastline. So I don't have a lot to say about it other than DCR is engaged in that initiative, and I hope that we can bring some of those lessons and sort of what's kind of coming out of that back to this group, since several of us are engaged in that. And then the last thing is along those lines, NOAA Coastal Resiliency competition. So the Commonwealth just submitted, or is in the process of submitting, I think it's due next week, a really large $70 million proposal to NOAA, and it will affect our ability to be able to implement some of the projects that are going to come out of that Resilient Mass Coast strategy. So that's just one funding source that we're looking for, and DCR is a part of that, as well as 90 other entities across the coastline. So looking forward to kind of an update on that, hopefully as well. And that, I think, is my update for those bits.
Great.
Great. Again, my name is Paul Costello. I'm the city engineer. And as a city engineer, we work closely with the planning department, but we also design and construct projects. And I'm part of the DPW, so we maintain and clean up after floods as well. So I'm really at ground zero as to what we're doing. The city of Quincy has about 27 miles of coastline. North Quincy in particular is why we're here. If you get a heavy rain and the water flows down the Neponset River, you can tell that it hits North Quincy. And if we have an elevated coastline flooding condition, the water has no place to go. 2 weeks ago, the tide elevation was elevation 14.3, which was extremely high. And it was preceded by 12 hours of rain. So the rain came down the Neponset and hit a elevation 14 tide. So significant parts of Quincy, North Quincy, were underwater for several hours, so the tide went out. The damage wasn't as bad as the storm in 2018. There was no repetitive loss of property. So I'll leave the city's working on a hazard mitigation plan. We did it in 2019. We're in a 5-year upgrade right now as part of our municipal vulnerability planning. I'll let Rob talk about some of that. So we inform both of those plans. The city has prepared an inundation model. So we're modeling a 2070 tide elevation. which is very significant, with a 100-year storm event simultaneously. And with that scenario, we've developed many projects. It all comes down to funding. We do what we can. So we spend about $30 million a year on roadways anyway, including Quincy Shore Drive. We did some work for the water and sewer in preparation to pave that road. So when we pave a road, we look at all the utilities. So drainage utilities, obviously, for this discussion. The city has several pump stations. We just completed $18 million worth of seawall out in House Neck, and we'll be doing phase 2. So you can only imagine when we have 27 miles of coastline, but about 11 and a half miles of seawall. So there's a lot of exposed coastline. And sea level rise is real. I've been an engineer for 35, 40 years, and I'm amazed that we used to design for a certain rainfall and tide. We don't do that. It's unbelievable what's happening. I've been for city 7 years. Just in the last 7 years, the storms that we've had it's real. So it's trying to get the funding and working with, we work with the EPA and the state on many things, so.
Paul's maybe not giving himself enough credit, and I'll come around to it, but he and I really got to work closely together on the last 5-year update to the hazard mitigation plan. And in that report, both Paul and I, felt it was important to do a couple of things. One, we felt it was important to redesign our city based off of watersheds. So we came up with a series of mapping that had 7 watersheds. So we wanted to avoid political boundaries or roadways because it's the water. We gotta chase the water. We gotta chase it upstream. The other thing we did is we acknowledged the climate change in the last report. We didn't pick any, leading, forecast. We simply said, just look at the poll of polls, each 5-year update, and just keep monitoring as we go, because the crystal ball gets a little difficult to talk 100 years down the road. As Paul acknowledged, it's happening now, and that's, where we tried to educate the public. But another thing we did 5 years ago is, engineering planning, this is part of our work life. We found that other sections of government really, is it real? So, and questioning some of it. And we did a lot of in-reach on the last hazard mitigation plan. You hear a lot about outreach, but I think in-reach becomes important because, I have a little bit of nervousness speaking to the general public about what we're doing. These are difficult issues. And there's legacies here that we keep encountering, we were talking about, the Quincy's about to celebrate its 400, year anniversary. It all started here. We're going back in history. I couldn't imagine Boston with some of the landfill areas. How do you start to untie that knot? Some pretty interesting stuff. But if I could pull it back to the 7 watersheds, 5 years ago, Paul took that as a challenge, and he started the flood inundation modeling, and that really has been a game changer for our 2 departments because of the development pressure we're under. Paul broke down, in the 7 watersheds, we've got it broken down to 220 micro watersheds, and then we've set out to, at different, we couldn't do it all at once, but we've been putting together this modeling. And we can play Mother Nature a little bit, as Paul said. We can test out, rainfall with the storm surge, because in our plan, 1A is sea level rise, 1B is the rainfall. And to what we're seeing, I think when we do in that update, we were still fresh on that blizzard winter. And that wasn't one blizzard, that was a weather pattern that gave us 3 blizzards in a row. And I don't feel like we ever recovered from the first one when you're already preparing for the 3rd one. And if I could make a comment about recent weather, it seems like everything is like an inch of rainfall with 30-mile-an-hour winds. That's a common rain event. And now, we just saw 3 rain events over a few-week period. And the last one, all of a sudden, you got a full water table and, or watershed, you got the stormwater flow down the brook, you got the storm coming in, and we had standing flooding. But it really wasn't a bad storm, just some heavy rain and some wind, but not like a big nor'easter that, I think it ranked 4th behind the blizzard, right? We're the anniversary of the blizzard. So this weather kind of thing, I don't think, so this, I want to look at that a little bit more with this hazard mitigation plan. Like, we report on federal disaster storms, but there's so many more, intermediary storms we're not tracking. And then as we gear up for this hazard mitigation plan, we have another colleague, Heather Liss, wetland scientist. Paul mentioned some gaps in our fortifications. We're gonna, take a closer look at our marshes. We're gonna look at how they can act as sponges to maybe hold some storm water through a high tide cycle and then release it. So that's some of the work we're gonna try to focus a little bit more on in this next update. It's going on. We had the kickoff meeting a few weeks ago. So in this first quarter, we look to be hopefully first draft into FEMA. And I think over the course of the 5 years, the fortifications, the sea level rise, the inland flooding, now we have that technical kind of foundation to move on. And like I said, people are still wanting to build in our communities. The coast is desirable, so there's some really difficult decisions ahead of us. But this is a great opportunity to speak to the community and other interested parties and get some feedback on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, that's excellent. And Josh Eckart-Lee, Town of Milton, work on a much smaller scale than all of my colleagues here, but we do our best. And part of that is because we're not a coastline community, right? We have a lot of salt marsh and we have a lot of the Neponset, but we don't actually have the coastline to deal with, which is a blessing for us in many ways when it comes to our resilience planning. Our last sort of hazard mitigation plan was in 2021, and we focus a lot on the sort of inland flooding we deal with, and not enough on sort of increased impact that we're seeing from the king tides and the storm surge that is sort of encroaching into what may become coastline in Milton down the line. The salt marshes are becoming less marshes and more just continued beds of salt water. We're sort of experiencing where you all are at the front line, that second line of how sea level rise and these increased severity storms are impacting our inland communities and really weakening the natural protection we get from salt marsh. Where it's been most sort of prevalent, we're kind of working inside out at the Baker Dam, that red square. That is the edge of the EPA's recently declared Superfund site at Lower Mills. So all up the river is EPA's sort of responsibility. But then once you get there, you get into Milton's only sort of municipally managed piece of river access, which is a lot of responsibilities for us. And also you still have salt marsh and PCB, lead, and chromium contamination from the Superfund site. So we're sort of hemmed in on both sides by the increasing saltwater and the downstream pollutants from the EPA site, and we're kind of limited in our planning capacity in our two-person department as opposed to your multiple departments that are all dealing with this and teams. And so we really rely on a lot of our excellent volunteers at NEPRA who are wonderful. The expertise of Heather in the last few meetings and with this team has been really invaluable in DCR. So I'm jumping to a later question on regional collaboration, but our projects really rely on the strength of our neighbors. We're working now on a seawall repair at Milton Landing. There's a ramp there that is seeing the increased flooding hit the Mattapan trolley line all the way in, where we're trying to protect both our park and our marina resources, but as well public transit. So that's a small project in its design phase. They were talking about multiple hundreds of millions. We got $140,000, and it was a huge win for us, pending MBTA communities compliance. But our planning work is limited. but we're doing our best. We are behind many of our other peer communities, not even our sort of larger neighbors in climate action planning, but we are developing our climate action plan now. We've finally gotten a greenhouse gas inventory, and that in conjunction with our sort of understanding of the sort of MVP hazards has given us a good foundation for doing actual climate planning in Milton rather than the kind of spot by spot, project by project resilience work that we've been doing in the past.
Right. And I just want to mention, as we're going through this, as you guys mentioned projects, Jeff is taking notes for us, and we'll collate information to pass out to everyone, so we don't have to, you want us to like jot down something real fast and see if we got it right. We'll definitely follow up. All right, fantastic. So I think we can just move on straight on to the next question, which is, in your view, or in the municipal view that you're here to kind of talk about, what needs to happen next for planning and also community outreach?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So for Boston, with all of the projects that are part of the Climate Ready Boston initiative, there is a whole suite of engagement that we do for each project. So with Tinian Beach last year, we held 2 public workshops, got out into the neighborhood. Once we start up the next project, such as a Neponset Circle project or any other project that has been outlined as a part of the Coastal Resilience Solutions for Dorchester report, you know, each of those pieces will have its own suite of community engagement. And obviously, community engagement also just involves coming to these meetings and really in the off times when we're not actively working on a project, continuing to talk about the things that we're doing. So attending meetings like this, we go to coffee hours that the mayor hosts. We really make sure that we're getting out into the community, and our community that we represent is Dorchester, East Boston, Charlestown, North End, downtown South Boston. So we're continuing to do engagement throughout the city, but always open to be talking about our Dorchester projects in particular. Hannah and I are kind of the lead on those things. So continued engagement, really just we're out here, we'll speak to whatever needs to be spoken to, and try to meet you where you're at when you ask us if we don't already go there.
Yeah, so I think just reiterating, I think a lot of it is very project specific rather than kind of like holistic climate resilience planning. That's all sort of like completed and will be revisited in the future as needed, but really it's project specific engagement opportunities. And the other thing I want to mention too is that the city is working on a new initiative really related to sort of, as we've all been alluding to, the storms that are happening now, like extreme weather preparedness and response, because not only do we need to think about really the long term, but also sort of immediate things that are happening. And so working with Office of Emergency Management as well, and really trying to make sure that community engagement, we're thinking kind of holistically when people talk about resilience and want to know about what's happening with specific storms. So a lot of internal coordination so that we can present a holistic front when we do community engagement.
Well, I would say community engagement, it's a lot after a very bad storm, almost daily. We always begin with the maintenance of the drainage system. More and more people are starting to see water in their yards and their basements that they haven't in the past. So we need to make sure our drainage systems are properly cleaned. And then all that knowledge leads into projects. And we have hundreds of millions of drainage projects with different priorities. So you have to prioritize that. And every project we have, we also have a public process where we solicit opinions from people. You're comparing a $20 million seawall in Squantum versus several pump stations in a different area of the city. What makes one more important than the other? So there's a lot of hard decisions that have to go into it, which is where, as Rob said, the you have the big umbrella level planning and try to target the, projects. And we'll have workshops. Rob can get into how many we have scheduled. Then based on that input, we'll target projects. And, a lot of it becomes about flooding. And we're sitting here separated by geography, but stormwater doesn't recognize any one of us. The water, when the water floods and the water comes down in the Neponset River past Milton, it comes into Quincy. It's a lot of water. So we looked at the rain gauges after the last storm, and in the Canton area, there might be 300 cubic feet per second. Think about a cubic foot of water, 300 in a second. By the time it passes Dedham in Mother Brook, is it Mother Brook? Mother Brook adds another 1,000 cubic feet per second, because you're getting Charles River water. And by the time the water gets to Baker Dam, you're looking at 2,000 cubic feet per second. And then it spills into Quincy and Dorchester, where the high tide is maxed out. So, that's what we're up against. So, controlling the water that's coming down the Neponset a little bit would help, and help all of us. We're at the mouth of the Neponset, so we're getting it. It's like living on a hill and you're on the upper part of the hill. You don't realize the people at the bottom of the hill. So that's what we're up against. So the projects, getting the funding, it's really a state and federal.
Yeah. Well, you got the sewer group as well, right?
Yes. So when you have extreme flooding, obviously the drainage system is inundated. Probably 25 or probably 30% now of Quincy's sewer system is underwater at high tide. So all the infiltration, we're lining all of our sewer pipe in some of the drainage pipe that's in the low-lying watershed areas. It's a water quality issue. So we spend about $7 to $10 million a year just on lining sewer pipe and drain pipe, including in the Neponset watershed.
Yeah. So I think Paul does a lot of that outreach, project specific. For me, I made in my opening remarks that comment about inReach I did, and that the hazard mitigation levels. So, and obviously we've always had a large Asian population in Quincy, and the environmental justice push is going to be a bigger push on this cycle. So we're looking to get into some of those communities as well. We've partnered with MAPC in the past to do some, I think it was about 10 years ago, we did like a video game, not based off of the written word, but tried to tease out questions within, communities that have English as a second language. And, I always do it, but it's good to see the results. Folks want clean water, they want safe streets and parks, and it doesn't matter, where you come from. There's a basic, quality of life everyone demands. So there's some of the inReach. Another piece, and my colleagues in Boston tipped me off on that. We relied on a contingent of some fire department personnel to manage the emergencies. And I think around the last update, we had the 2018 storm that knocked out 200 houses along Quincy's coast. And the mayor did fully fund an emergency management position. And that's been a bit of a game changer. There's some more outreach there, sort of what you do in the moment of events. And then hazard mitigation, we do a lot of, maybe trying to check in with different neighborhoods within the community. Again, I know I mentioned the inReach. Paul, I would say 5 years ago, you and I weren't on too many of these committees. I'm on 4 of them now.
Yeah,
So there's a part of that outreach is you're staring at it, with the two of us saying, you know what, we gotta put our necks out a little bit more. This is all hands on deck, and, Milton's in our boat too, We're all in the same boat, so, and there's plenty of room, I think, so. So that's some of my thoughts, I think on the outreach piece.
Yeah, I think you both bring up that in the moment response that is something we're really focused on. That was a major point that came out of our MVP workshops, where folks knew how to participate on a Tuesday night to come to the library and they knew after a storm which phone lines to fill up with complaints. But sort of in that moment, they didn't know what Milton was doing, what Milton was able to do, and who was responsible for dealing with the emergencies. We rely heavily on our police and fire for emergency management, and they are great at what they do and also not experts, and have their whole other set of responsibilities on top of that. And residents don't know who to call in the moment and what we're doing to sort of prepare for those moments. Certainly our actual material outreach is way less than it is City of Boston, City of Quincy. But the challenge that was really highlighted from residents was not an inability to hold meetings down in the basement of Town Hall, because I know no one wants to be down in that windowless basement, but it's about when disaster strikes, what will we be able to do for residents? How can we communicate beforehand what is going to happen, and in those moments, how do we communicate? And it's still not an answer we've really found, but we're trying to find. Regional collaboration has been good for regional emergency management, but it's still very nascent. Our posting to X and Facebook does not help a single person when we're in these emergencies, but that's also something we do. And some would say that's the time it takes for someone in our sort of emergency response team that includes DPW as well could be spent actually helping deal with the flooding. And so oftentimes with a town our size, it comes down to that staff capacity. And you need it less if you can prepare in advance, but you also need it to do that preparation. We're really trying, but it's reliance on a lot of volunteers, especially a conservation commission and folks who get that word out more than it is the outreach we do as staff.
Great. And I'll say for NEPRA's point of view on this, I know you guys mentioned project-specific things like the project Delanney Beach or emergency response, and we're trying to help build together continual conversation along this that's not tied to a specific project. So hopefully we're working towards that. And as Sarah mentioned, that grant to know what the state's putting together, NEPRA's hopefully, we're also in that grant, and hopefully that is funded, and that will continue to fund our engagement with you all, and kind of as we develop the outreach plans along our next several meetings, putting those into practice, getting those events together, and getting to the people who aren't already aware of what number to call.
Sean, I was just going to offer, for your planning purposes, a time check that I think it's about 7 minutes supposedly left before we're supposed to unleash people to ask questions, and you can do with that whatever you want with that information.
All right, let's push through, and I think we can, even if we're a little bit over, I think it's okay. Do you guys want to answer how else you're engaged in regional collaboration? And some of this we've already addressed. And I think a big one is what other municipal stakeholders should be engaged in this process for your own municipality, but also if you want to talk about other municipalities.
Yeah, I can kick it off. A lot of what we do with the city is coordinate internally with other departments and quasi-governmental organizations that are also relevant to the conversation. So even Delanney and I are on different teams, so we're collaborating with each other. We work with Boston Water and Sewer Commission, BWSC. I think they're probably a very relevant partner for this conversation as well. We mentioned earlier the director of green infrastructure for the city of Boston, Kate England, who now has a larger team, who's working on a lot of stormwater in close collaboration with BWSC as well. The Office of Emergency Management might be another good group to kind of engage with or be aware of as well. In terms of regional collaboration, one thing I want to mention is there's actually another U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study that's happening at the metro level, metropolitan watershed study is what it's called. And that's another way that we are a participant in that. It's somewhat confusing because there's 2 Army Corps studies, but it's good to kind of be aware of them, and that is another kind of touch point for regional collaboration. We participate in, obviously, watershed conversations like this and with Boston's other watersheds as well. So that's where a lot of the conversation is happening. Delaney, would you add anything?
I think the core study you're talking about is from Hull to Nahat. So it's like the Boston Harbor watershed is
Yeah.
whatever that is, but yeah. I only have one more comment, but I wanted to, and maybe we talk about this during the breakouts, but I wanted to mention the area of critical environmental concern resource management plan. This is something that Ian and I have talked about a couple of times as just part of figuring out what we do with that document. So I am not an expert in the program, though somebody at DCR knows a lot more than me and gave me just a little bullet to say, because he knew I was coming to this meeting today, but ACEC resource management plans are community written and led. So it needs to come from you all and then coordinate with the state who reviews and approves it. So just a little plug, if like you want to update it, which I think we want it to be updated. It's the last plan was written in 1996. And at the time it reflected the desires and needs of the estuary based on some of the big concerns at the time, which some of those big concerns still exist today. But I think one thing that wasn't included was thinking about, sea level rise and sort of how we need to incorporate that in thinking about the estuary and the ACEC writ large. We ran into a couple of conversations around some of the restrictions that this designation has on doing construction projects. So we're a little limited to what can be done for good reason, because we're trying to protect the resource. But it is something that, DCR would be supportive of this community investigating how to, revisit that document and make it more current, so.
So intercity, every department is involved with coastal resiliency, from the police and fire for response. The last 6 years, I've been really impressed by the city of Quincy's emergency response. During an extreme flood, Howes Neck, Squantum, and North Quincy become islands. So the city of Quincy has separate emergency management facilities on each of those islands, because getting to them, you shut off somewhat. And then there's the big picture. The legal department's involved with regulations, planning, obviously, zoning. We have a geographic information system that's been updated to deal with a lot of the flooding. Public facilities that are impacted by coastal resiliency. So all these department heads all talk to each other on a regular basis, and DPW is a big part of it. Regionally, the mayor called the South Shore communities together. We've had several meetings, talk about local projects, seawalls, raising roads to a seawall barrier from Nahant over to Hull. But that would be a multi-billion-dollar project. We work with the state, DCR and DEP on a regular basis. The state has a lot of roads. Furnace Brook is state-owned. We work with the EPA and the Corps of Engineers on grant money and water quality issues. We have a tide gate in Quincy we'd like to fix, make it automated in Blacks Creek. So the Corps of Engineers is really pushing it, but the EPA is against it. So, we all try to work together as well as we can. It gets tricky with the permitting stuff.
Yeah, I think I've made some remarks. I think, Paul and I are starting to participate a little bit more, on behalf of the city in these types of groups. Water, doesn't know any boundaries. So I do think, we're in it together. I get nervous about the urgency. When you have to answer to homeowners that are asking how you doing, that had impacts to their homes right on the coast. It's humbling. And, I think DCR came back around and did some adjustments to the Furnace Brook, and sort of added a windy path and it created so much more storage capacity, but we had to field a number of questions, what's going on? They're cutting trees down, to change the brook, but that was tied to flooding that occurred in 2010. So that took 12 years to get to even, I don't know if you'd call it new construction, but at least an enhanced maintenance project took 12 years. And that's the part I think we wake up every day getting nervous. I mean, the last big one was 2018 for us, but there's a number of, king tides or moderate, storms. That urgency is, I'm feeling it a little bit. So, yeah, other municipal stakeholders, so through the hazard mitigation, we hear a lot from residents, as rightfully so. Seems the business community isn't as gung-ho of jumping into this conversation, and perhaps, that's something that the watershed could work on a little bit. And I think you might have tried to get some money, I don't know if it was you or another gentleman, at one point, maybe out of some of the, State Street, they have the State Street South, and maybe to try to pony up a little bit of money to understand this. Didn't work out, and they drifted away. I just feel like the business community, at least in this general area, hasn't really stepped forward quite yet. There's a lot of business interest here, obviously. We've got the MWRA sewer plant out on that island. We've got the MBTA bridges, the railway, whether it's Morrissey or, Quincy Shore Drive, it's impacts regularly here. These are state routes. This is infrastructure that's not just local, it's regional impacts. I think one of the earlier spots the state recognized wasn't a good spot to enhance was the MassDOT barn.
Yeah.
Right there on the highway, like, what are we doing? It's right next to the marsh. So that was sort of a wake-up call for me. I know there's the food distribution center in Everett or Chelsea that was like, oh my God, if that gets knocked out, we don't have food, after 2 weeks. So a lot of those are getting fleshed out by our state partners. So I think that conversation's good, and that needs to continue to happen, with both local and state, really understanding the infrastructure we have. I guess what I believe, I guess you can. There's one more bullet, I don't know, so.
I'll be quick, and I'll actually echo that reticence from business communities to be involved. As I mentioned, we're in the sort of first year of our climate action planning process. When that sort of advisory committee was formed, a seat was set aside for a designee from our Chamber of Commerce, and that seat has not been filled in over a year. Whether that's indicative of a larger problem, I don't know how I really feel about having Chamber of Commerce in our climate action planning. Our sort of priorities are not strictly economic development related, but it's an interesting note.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the blizzard winter and we lost the red line for a week.
Exactly.
People couldn't get to work.
Yeah, it's certainly, economic impacts are significant. Something that I saw about this time last year was a chart that showed sort of towns' relative size compared to their MAPC sort of impact and projects that our regional planning agency worked on, and Milton punched way above its weight when it came to getting MAP assistance on projects, MAPC assistance. To that end, we're working with them on two sort of big regional issues. One, the Boston Blue Hills Connection Project, which is sort of down on the other side of the sort of freshwater side of the river. And we're also working with one of the sub-regions that we're a part of, because we're a weird community in a lot of ways, the Three Rivers Interlocal Council, which is the sort of South Shore group of MAPC communities on a language access program. As I said earlier, getting people to actually know what we're doing is a real challenge, especially when all the materials we produce are for English-speaking people who are sort of standardly abled. We don't do anything that sort of caters to the wide range of ways people sort of intake information, and that's been a real problem that we're hoping as a region we can address for both sort of bulk purchasing and group purchasing of those services, but also because none of us have the same resources that City of Boston, City of Quincy have to do kind of translation assistance and language access work. So we're hoping that as a region, we can kind of leverage that scale to do better access work. And that will certainly apply when we start doing the communications around our climate action plan.
Great. I just wanted to chime in and say that it was all great responses. And I want to thank Sarah for mentioning the resource management plan for the Neponset Estuary area of critical environmental concern. So part of that is engaging you guys now and others throughout the next couple, ideally years as we discuss this and keep moving forward. And I also just kind of mention that we, in addition to the community side, we're also getting better data. So we've got some money to look at the salt marshes, kind of give them a health checkup and really know where they're at right now. And we've also got some federal money to look and come up with plans to improve the modeling for coastal flooding, specifically within the estuary, and also make a proposal for what's the biggest bang for your buck climate project that could be reasonably undertaken. So those are all coming in the near future, and we'll certainly keep you guys all in the loop. And as we're moving all towards that rewriting of that research method. Ian, if you want to chime in something.
No.
I think now, just given the time, I think we'll switch over to questions. And so what we'll do is, if you've got a question, raise your hand. If on Zoom you want to speak and ask a question, raise your hand on Zoom. There's a little react button. You can raise your hand. If you'd rather just type it into the chat, you can do that, and Ian will read it out to us. And I do want to just say, kind of upfront for the questions, we know there are a lot of projects that are specific. So you mentioned Tinian Beach. I know there's reasonable concern about the MBTA plans in Milton. I'd like to keep this kind of focused on the big picture and focused on things we talked about tonight, if possible. So yeah, we'll start with Mike.
Yes, well, first I want to thank the board for taking the time to come out and chat with us. Being a city employee for the city of Boston, I know these meetings are continuously and always ongoing. I live down in Lower Mills, and the biggest dam during this horrific rain we've had is the trees blocking it right now. A bunch of my wife's office is J. Galvin Insurance is right beside it. And I just wanted to make an observation that it might have to get moved soon. It's just Mother Nature getting in the way, and we got to go clean up the mess afterwards. And thank you for coming out tonight.
I'll just jump in real quick and just say, online, can you hear the questions coming from the back of the room? So make sure that the owl's picking everything up. Okay, great.
Nodding heads.
Hi, we've had a command from Cedar Grove Civic Association, a former city employee. When I worked for the city, I was the city registrar, and at one point, we had to work with DCR in identifying out in one of the islands bodies that had been buried 100-something years ago, and there were issues with that. I know that, I'm sure people are looking at that. When I drive over the Granite Ave Bridge, the water's seeping into Cedar Grove Cemetery from the river at higher levels all the time. And I don't know if that's something that is in any of the projects that are looking at it, because it's so low lying, it's gonna really impact quickly. So is that something that anybody knows, if anybody had it on their radar?
That's a Quincy, that's next to
No,
Furnace Brook.
Dorchester, Cedar Grove Cemetery, yeah.
Actually, right adjacent to DCR on Marsh, kind of just right behind it.
And on the walkway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but this is a great, this is
Yeah.
one of the great reasons why I love to do community engagement, because I will certainly make a note of it and see if anyone's thinking about this. I would imagine someone is probably thinking about it, but it hasn't come up in any of our projects
I
yet.
know that when my brother had passed away a couple years ago, and I had to go look for a plot, and they showed me the area down there, and they said, oh, it's a beautiful view. I went, yeah, oh. Bring me back, brother.
Wow.
But definitely, I mean, it's the same water that's going into, if you look at the trolley. And the trolley obviously is one of the lower things, and is definitely a giant issue in making sure that can still go, because, lots of people use it, and it's how they get there. And you really have to come up with other transportation things if the trolley was underwater.
A part of the Mattapan line transformations mission at 127 million's already been allocated to that, is upgrading all the stations and the lines. I don't know what sort of subsection of that is going towards resilience work, but at least at the stations, I know those are all being upgraded.
I think you demonstrate a good point, though. When it comes to drainage and coastal resiliency, the people who live in a neighborhood that witness it, that's the best evidence. If people take pictures or videos, they inform a project. People become like weathermen, where they know that at a certain rainfall,
Something doesn't look right. Yeah.
right, or they expect their yard to flood under certain circumstances. If the wind changes direction, it impacts me this way or that way. Yeah, so neighborhood involvement is extremely important.
I think we've got one question on Zoom that we can answer, and then turn back to the chat.
Yeah, oh, in the chat, for some reason, I'm not seeing the chat, hold on. So, yeah, we have a question on Zoom here, make it big enough that I can actually read it. Kristen, do you wanna just unmute yourself and ask this question, or you want me to read it?
I can read it, it's fine. So I was just wondering, hearing all of the plans coming out of Quincy, and I'm just wondering what plans there are for climate ready and hazard mitigation towards the from like Gulliver's down, because we've been flooding for a really long time, and it is getting worse. I mean, we have yards falling into the Neponset, and because the salt marsh is so damaged at this point. So I guess I'm just wondering what's going on there.
So the inundation model for North Quincy has been completed, along with about 90% of the entire city east of the expressway. So all those projects, including your area, are on a list with the planning department. We'll be having workshops when they start, Rob, in March.
Yeah, March.
Yeah, the report will be updated in April. So there'll be workshops that'll be advertised online. So if you can come and speak about your project. So the key with coastal resiliency is we have to plan for the future and the worst, but be adaptive today, given the limited funding that we have, and try to do what we can today to limit repetitive loss damage. Like at a House Neck, for example, we built the seawall foundation to raise it 5 feet. But for now, we only raised it 2 feet, given the money. So we'll be able to come back whenever and raise it quickly 2 more feet. The project that Rob referenced on Furnace Brook, we widened Furnace Brook to have a larger storage volume, but that's part of a bigger project that has a pump station potentially somewhere down the line, so that widening we did today will serve as a detention pond for the pump station. So we're trying to be adaptive and do things today to get as much bang for the buck, I guess, is the bottom line. But yeah, so keep an eye out, and we'll see you at the workshop.
This is also a tricky spot, because the neighborhood she's talking about it's right on the edge of Quincy and Milton.
Right.
So it's like, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, you live in Milton, right? So it's kind of like, you almost needs to track what's happening in 2 communities
Right.
to.
Right.
to
So
get-
we'll think we're in Dorchester, but we're not. We're in Milton, and so that whole area, basically from Gulliver's, including part of President's, just basically all the way down that little peninsula there, that includes 2 Granite and DPW lot and Heritage. It's just all soaking, sopping wet all the time now.
Yeah, here's a good example. So Cunningham Park in Milton has flooding issues.
Oh, yeah?
And there was a plan to install a big drain pipe that would go under the expressway and dump it into Furnace Brook, which would have solved the problem. The problem is, that Furnace Brook
And it's your
right,
problem.
Furnace Brook right now drains into Black's Creek. And at a very heavy rainfall, at low tide, we close the gate at Black's Creek so that the tide can't get in. And Black's Creek floods with the water from Quincy. And so it acts as a storage basin so people don't flood out. So if we had solved the problem in Milton, it would have exacerbated the problem in Quincy. So stormwater is a tricky animal.
I think that goes back to your point on the resource management plan, because all of that is also the ACEC area that has been
Right.
a little bit ignored.
Josh, it's not ACEC now, though, is it? I mean, I think it, to get to a previous point, I think it would be important to look at that whole area from Gulliver's
Right.
north to consider it for ACEC,
Right.
because it is just always wet now.
Right, so that's a good point. So it's not a model that the city of Quincy does. It's a regional model that we all do collectively. And it needs to be a statewide model. It needs to be a federal model because New Hampshire's water is coming into Boston, Massachusetts as well. So these are regional issues that don't know boundaries. So I think we need to, because of the Neponset River, the size of the Neponset and the water that comes through it is much bigger than Town Brook or Furnace Brook. So it's a major issue, actually.
Yeah, and just to the Milton end of things, because Kristen, I know we've spoken and you've been very active in the MBTA community's planning process. And we don't have a climate action plan, as I've said, we're working on it. But there are sites along Granite Ave that are sort of key parcels for our MBTA community's compliance plan. These are currently all impervious surface. It's all brownfields, parking lot. This is where flooding just makes itself worse, right? It's an opportunity the town has identified from its 2015 master plan, from its hazard mitigation plans, and in its housing production plans as obvious areas that ought to be redeveloped, and use that redevelopment as an opportunity to repair those sites, add the green infrastructure we need, add even bright infrastructure where needed to help sort of mitigate the damage these are causing to the salt marsh, right? Because the salt marsh, as it especially recedes, just then hits parking lot on salt shed as it enters your neighborhood.
Josh, that's pavement on top of salt marsh.
Exactly. So we've really prioritized in what our plans are, maximizing the open space requirements in that zoning in a way that the current sort of sites just have none of. So redevelopment will be the opportunity we have because we don't have the funds to do like a town-led revitalization of these state-owned properties largely to get those green infrastructures that we need to help prevent flooding.
Quick question on the update to the city of Quincy hazard plan. Have we identified hazardous waste sites that are in the Massachusetts contingency plan? I'm speaking as a licensed site professional, and the recent revisions to the MCP that requires LSPs to look at their sites that they're managing and come up with a mitigation plan for climate change. So I think it'd be great if we could identify in our plan where these sites are. It's readily available. We can probably get it on the enterprise portal or something like that. That's like an overlay. I think would be a great idea.
Yeah, so it's all based on elevation. So we've identified public facilities that are within the flood areas. And that's probably a good idea to add. So
Well, the hazard mitigation plan has limits because
Yeah.
it wants to stick to natural events, right? But in our capabilities assessment, we started to incorporate some of those issues. I call it the environmental legacy, and it's coastal. Neponset River for Quincy, that was our port of call for the granite industry for 100 years, right? Our bigger concern, to be honest, is probably the Fore River with the former shipyard And the active industrial use is still occurring in that basin. But I think for sure, I know I've talked about it, I think that's one of the issues too, because no one tends to want to talk about this environmental legacy, but I'm sorry, New England was part of the Industrial Revolution. We also were part of the military-industrial complex for several world wars, and you know, I think all of us that have been in this business recognize the military wasn't the best environmental steward. So there are legacies here, and they're coastal and they're inland as well. You know, looking at the South Weymouth Naval Air Station. But again, the hazard mitigation plan is, you know, earthquake, storms. So we do talk about our cluster of some of the environmental uses, but I would like to, and I see the last question, what can this group do? I think some of that environmental legacy, if you take it out of our hands, because we gotta work at this day to day, that might be a good regional task, because it's all over. I mean, you mentioned the Superfund site at the dam.
I'm thinking particularly about, in my mind's eye, about the Sprague oil tanks in the Fall River. And they are, you know, they're only about, maybe there's those little, you know, embankments. They're toast during a storm, and we're gonna have a huge oil spill without some mitigation.
Yeah, so you can look at the environmental risk sites from the state's database and map it in GIS pretty easily. And then overlay the floodplain based on the 2070s event. So you could do some, I think our legacy is helping with the planning. We're getting stuff done today. But you can, you know, leave some of those issues for.
I'm planning for an oil spill of 40,000 gallons or more.
Yeah.
I think that facility has been flagged anyway, because it's right on the water.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for recognizing that people who live in the neighborhoods that are being flooded know where the water goes. I live in Port Norfolk, we know where the water's coming from, we know where the water goes. And probably the fact that we have the Venezia restaurant on the end is probably apropos, because we're all gonna get gondolas soon, but anyway.
Right, whenever I go to the Venezia, I look over at Quincy, I say, oh my God.
But you've all recognized the fact that the water is rising and that the river is increasing in size. And as it increases in size, in order to save the estuary, which I think this is what this is all about, we need more open space for the estuary to grow. So there needs to be a purposeful, I don't know how to say this. You have to do this, in other words, to save and create the open space along the river. And it just bothers me that, and it's multiple cities here, not just one or the other, where you're continuing to build and plan along the coastline and specifically along the river as well. And that seems to go completely against what you're saying here tonight, that these areas need to be saved for the estuary to survive. So is it ever going to get to the point where the towns are going to say, look, we have to just stop building along the coast or stop building along the Neponset River or anywhere where these things are happening, not only to save the estuary, which everyone recognizes as vitally important for the health, not only of the wildlife that lives in the estuary, but for the ocean itself. But you're also putting people and buildings and infrastructure in harm's way. Why would you do that? So, I mean, is that ever going to come to that point, or are we continually going to fight each project that comes along?
For the last 20 years, because of the federal government, there's been a lot of new stormwater regulations. In the old days, you would have water run off a new development. Now, Rob and I talk regularly. We review every development and we try to have all the water infiltrate on site with no net runoff.
But that's still not giving space for the estuary to grow.
Well, that's a different, so if a private developer comes before us, he's responsible for that private parcel. So if we limit no net runoff there, now in the open space, every foot of the Neponset River, all the way back to Canton and Norwood, if all the towns collectively worked, which is where I hope this model that we're working on, the problem isn't at the bottom of the hill that's flooding. The problem is uphill where the water, more open space in each town dedicated to storage, like we did in Furnace Brook. We widened Furnace Brook to store more water before it got to Blacks Creek in the ocean. We had no choice, really. So if Milton can store more water in Milton and not have it run off into Quincy, it'd be much appreciated.
I mean, that's the goal.
Right,
Like,
that's the goal.
We're doing
That's the goal.
CMPs, the
Right.
best management practices. We just completed one behind Collicott, Cunningham. But each one of those has been met with just as much sort of opposition as if we were building an apartment building on those sites. So it's been tricky when it comes to like, where does the sort of, is there a uniform voice in a neighborhood? And obviously the answer is no, because we're all individual complex beings with our own purpose. But like, when it comes to what we can plan for and the way we have to sort of be equitable in those plans and not be prescriptive into what goes into a place, the thing we can have control over is exactly what you said, those open space regulations. That's why we've got the most sort of stringent open space requirements in all of the zoning we've adopted or are trying to adopt on those sites along the Neponset River. It's limiting to be sort of bound by the rules of 40A of the zoning code, of MGL, but that's a way we can sort of use the sort of regulatory bounds that we have to maximize open space, shy of DCR reclaiming these lands, which we're not opposed to, but that's not something we can do.
In Quincy, we are open space planning as well. That's a whole other plan.
Yeah, but I think we're not answering your question. And the struggle is this private property ownership, and folks have rights to build, and that is in the US Constitution. Zoning doesn't stop development, it helps try to
Well,
guide.
there are the rules about the flood zones and estuaries and.
But the engineers are designing around that, they're
That's my
designing,
point, though. When are they
they're
gonna
raising
stop
the
doing that?
utilities up. They're designing to get parking levels underneath to get wet, because you could move a car around. So that's the present, as sort of, I think Paul has described. That we're on the front lines of trying to push back on this, to hold the line. But if they get through us, they'll, or if there's a no, they'll go to the court systems and they'll try that route. I think everyone saw a development at the end of the Neponset at the 16 units. There was a pre-existing building there. It was kind of viewed that way. We didn't even know there was an old Chapter 91 license, but the owner knew, and he went and he reactivated and he put in a dock system. That was state regulations. That had nothing to do locally. So moneyed interest, as you know, they can get some things done. Engineers can build around the floodplain, and that's, what we've experienced.
So we have stopped projects that are in the floodplain because they cannot meet this current stormwater regulations.
Yeah, we try to get to them early. You don't see those ones we stop, but there are plenty.
I guess what I'm saying is I think there needs to be a more meaningful approach to save as much open space as possible. Even if it's private land, if it shouldn't be built on, it shouldn't be built on. To make all these rules and make them jump through hoops so that they can build on it, you're still taking away the open space. So even if you're diverting stormwater, you're still taking up the open space. And unless there's a willingness to do that, we're gonna lose a lot of estuary.
Yeah, we had a proposal for 30 units at 0 Harriet Ave. It was an old remnant of the State Street South complex where it jumped across the marsh and we had a higher density, a business C zone.
Yeah.
So someone bought the lot, proposed 30 units, and the community used the Community Preservation Act to come forward and buy that. And I think the flooding from a couple weeks ago was Harriet Ave. I mean, so we're seeing it, and we are trying. I think another theme you're hearing here too is resources. Paul, you had a comment, and I please don't hold them to this, but something like we need 500 million, to really address what we know out there, and we're doing it at 10, 20 million at a time.
This might sound absolutely crazy, and I'm not an engineer, but has anyone ever thought about putting a storm gate like they have in New Bedford at the mouth of the Neponset River to protect the
Yes.
entire?
Well, at the mouth of Boston Harbor is the current
Well, not the mouth
question.
of Boston Harbor, I'm talking about the beginning of it, sort of like Squantum to the gas tank.
Well, there's a, what they call the sea gate?
Yeah.
Sea barrier from Boston to Hull.
That's what
So
was
it's,
a big plan,
Right,
and
so-
UMass said they didn't like it, so it kind
Right.
of dropped. But I'm talking about a much smaller gate across the Neponset River from Squantum Park over to the natural gas tank. That could be open all the time, and you close it like the one in New Bedford during a storm. You close it at low tide so that there's room for the water coming down to fill up the area, and then you open it back after the tide goes out. I don't know how much something like that would cost, but when you're talking about millions and millions and millions for here and here and here and here and here, and State Street South and all of that, maybe it's not that crazy.
yeah, so if you build a gate there, for example, the water, the storm water gets impacted, and then there might be parts, abutting properties to the sea gate will get flooded.
Well, I've been telling that to the city of Boston for years, and they just
Right.
ignore me on that.
Right.
If you block it here, where's it gonna go?
Right,
And they're like, oh,
right.
it doesn't matter.
Right,
Sorry, guys.
so if you build a wall from Boston to Hull, then the communities south of Hull are gonna be getting more water.
Right. It
So
always
it-
goes somewhere.
Yeah, so it's a regional modeling, and we keep bringing up regional modeling, that's the key. And where you put the barrier, the wall, you know, then you have a bunch of small projects, or big projects simultaneously.
Well, I think the
The
thought
city,
is
the city of Quincy is getting money from FEMA.
Yeah.
And also from the state dam and, dam program, dam and seawall program.
But I think the hurricane barrier, that is the federal government.
That's a federal.
That it needs
It's the
to.
one in New Bedford?
Well, no, if we were to move forward with anything in Boston,
Boston, the
that's.
Seagate, Boston
That would have to
Seagate.
be like Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, yeah.
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 But
It's been done though. Amsterdam has huge floodgate. I mean, some of the European countries have been dealing with flooding a lot longer than we have, and they've done okay.
I think, Carrie, do you have a question? Hand up.
I am the conduit for questions. So unfortunately, Susan McPherson had put a question in the chat, but she directed it directly to me, and I didn't realize that it didn't go to the general chat. And she has left already, but she is going to look at the recording. So her question is, are there currently funds available to purchase water damaged homes and make that land available for flood mitigation?
Not that I know.
But that is a different strategy.
So, I mean, the
Okay.
big question is managed retreat, right? And I think, you know, the inner Boston Harbor, ultimately will get there, but it's the hurricane barrier or tide gate barrier conversation in the moment. We've tried to work with our own housing, we're a CDBG entitlement community with our Office of Healthy Homes who does rehab about doing the FEMA flood prone retrofitting, but we haven't gone so far as to start acquiring houses. I know the 2010 flooding, which was inland flooding back near East Milton Square, we zeroed down to about, I think, 14 houses that probably should have never been built 50 years ago. So do we buy out those houses or do we build a pump station? I think, you know, the political decision at the time was to build a pump station. So, but those questions are becoming a lot more clear and focused, and I think the dynamic will be changing soon because we're all seeing standing water at normal king tide events, so.
Are you looking at me because you know about the grant program? Oh.
No.
So
But now I
FEMA
wanna
does
know.
have several grant programs, including BRIC and HMGP and the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program that are implemented through the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, which is why you need your hazard mitigation plan so you can apply to buy out houses. So they will, you know, that's a community-led and driven application process, but the communities could work with MEMA to do that.
I would like to put a plug in for the climate action plan for Quincy. I belong to QCAN as well, and so we'll be asking the councilors of the city to please push forward with that. I think it'll dovetail nicely with what you guys are currently doing. So.
The collaborative nature of the discussion is really very encouraging. And I'm wondering about two things in that respect. One is how does it get operationalized? When? That's all one. And the second one is how the dichotomies, for example, one would be at the level of the estuary under the aegis of NEPRA, and the other might be subsets of that where some of the communities work together. Sean, if you could go back to the previous map, is that possible?
Yep, one moment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ian. You're the driver.
Yep, he's just the brains of the operation.
If you look to the right on this map of 93, you see there's a salt marsh. They're right there, where your cursor is.
Yep.
Now, right, boundaries are insignificant in respects. That salt marsh doesn't know, the river doesn't know what's in Quincy and what's in Milton. But we all have to take a look at the health of that salt marsh and extend it for as long as possible. Milton's salt marsh is on the left-hand side of that area and is only maybe 3 acres. But the health of that marsh is going to have a great bearing over time on flooding in the area, the protection of the residents in that area, as well as the roadways and a whole host of other variables. So we have approval from the Community Preservation Committee for funding pending ultimate approval by town meeting in May to go back and survey that land and delineate it, ascertain what's upland, what's wetland, and take a look at, we don't even have boundary markers in there. We've walked it. Nobody knows where the Quincy Milton line really is. It looks nice on a map, but you go to that site and it's invisible. So a couple of things would be taking a look, for example, at invasives that are in that salt marsh that destroy the salt marsh. Phragmites, for example, there are 3 major pockets of Phragmites in that salt marsh today that weren't there 15 years or so ago. And we know what that means for the health of the salt marsh and the life of the salt marsh. So we have to take a look at how we mitigate and correct that situation. So we'd like to work with Quincy and see whether or not we can collaborate on both sides of that line with that one salt marsh. And the owners of it, some of which will be Milton, some of which will be Quincy. We've heard that maybe State Street owns some of it, maybe Blue Cross Blue Shield owns some of it. So maybe, Paul, we could have a conversation offline and start to work together so that when we begin our work pending town meeting approval, we'd do it with the knowledge of one another and all the parties involved, the neighborhoods in the area, President's Golf Course, any businesses, et cetera.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work in that area. All the roads are newly paved. We replaced all the drainage on Harriet Ave. There was a 36-inch outfall that went out to creek that leads to the Neponset. And Norfolk County came out and cleared that for us. There is runoff off the State Street parking lot that goes into the neighborhood. And there is more Phragmites where that's happening. So we've done an awful lot of work there. So that the elevation of the road there is, say, elevation 9. So you get a 14 tide. That was about a foot of water over the road, brand new road that we did. But there is a pump station on John and Division Street. It's on our list to get replaced.
And
yeah.
We have in common DCR property with Blue Hills. Talk about stormwater mitigation, and there's a great example with Reading, Massachusetts, where they have built stormwater retention bases in their
Right.
conservation properties. And that water, as you said, it's like a leak in a roof. It shows up in one place, but you don't know where it is.
Right.
So how might our two communities be working together? 20% of Milton is in the Blue Hills and DCR, so we need to partner
Right.
with DCR
That-
and Quincy.
Yeah, so we've talked,
Maybe other communities in Canton, Dedham, they're all part of it.
so we have a consultant that has done a model, but it stops at the mouth of the Neponset. So if you guys have done an inundation model, working with Ian, we should all share the same models and see what's going to flood. Try to hold water upstream if we can, then the runoff from both our communities. It's a regional.
Yeah, I
keep
was gonna
saying
say, the project that you're talking about in Reading was as a result of Mystic River Watershed, the upper watershed stormwater study, where they looked across that entire upper region and identified through a mapping process. I don't remember how it was funded, but it was a multi-year study that was led by Myra. Identified the parcels where flood storage upstream would work, because it's, you know, kind of like a gravity fed sort of situation, but and then from there identifying which sites made sense, and then working with whether it was the community or some other sort of open space, you know, whether it was privately owned but was not developed, and what the opportunities were. So maybe learning from their approach and trying to replicate that might be a good kind of, doesn't really help necessarily the estuary, and I think what we all came to talk about, but to your point, we have to think bigger and watershed wide, so maybe that's.
Yeah, you have to think watershed, so 20% of Quincy is in the Neponset watershed. So when Rob referenced the 7 sub-watersheds within Quincy, each watershed has its own issues, plus and minus. So you have to try to balance the water with the risk involved with the projects. But the Neponset River watershed should really take the lead on what the issues, we'll work together.
That was a cool project.
We are currently working on a flood model study, the upper watershed north of the Baker Dam. And part of that is kind of trying to identify properties for larger flood storage.
Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, so the area from the Baker Dam to the coast, we have the coast modeled. So it's just filling in that gap. And how do you model what goes over the dam in the ocean? Yeah.
It's a big question that we would also like to know the answer.
And how do you stop it?
One thing I will.
Huge pump station.
Sort of one of the big takeaways I had from the kind of first phase of the modeling that we finished a number of months ago was just how vast the quantities of water are here. I mean, even talking about like the increase in, like even if you're just looking at like the 10-year storm, which is a relatively moderate sized storm, the increase in the volume of water you have to deal with in that, at that frequency is amazing. And if you start looking at the 100-year storm, it's kind of like, wow, where could we put that?
Right.
So
During the last storm, when the harbor was elevation 14, our weather consultant didn't think we would have certain problems, but I told him that it's gonna be raining for 12 hours before the high tide. So the water coming down the Neponset River is gonna create huge issues, and it did. You could see it coming. 2,000 cubic feet per second coming over Baker Dam, right into that estuary. That's a lot of water.
And it's gonna be fresh water,
Right,
and that's gonna impact upon
right,
plant life
right,
that the salt marsh is dependent upon to behave like a salt marsh
right.
to protect.
Yeah, it's amazing when you stand out at Squantum, on East Squantum Street, and you're looking at the tide coming in over the road, and you look back towards Milton, and it's higher than what's coming at you. because the Neponset's backed up
On the riverside.
on the riverside. The last three major storms, the water on the riverside has been higher than these astronomical high tides.
So I just want to be aware of the time. We do want to go to breakout groups afterwards. So I think we'll stop here. And thank you all so much for coming and talking about this. Take maybe like a 5-minute break and then we'll break